Another bitterly cold afternoon outside Dr. Frankenbike's bunker. Today we're continuing our theme of 90s superbikes, early 90s superbikes in the case of these three, and more importantly, the pursuit of perfection, aka historically correct restorations. Now, we talked about the Quinny recently, and I'll come back to that shortly. The Dynatech I've just got back and is looking beautiful, but today really the theme is this lovely 1991 Kona Explosif Black Edition. Now, you may remember last year I restored this, or just cleaned it up, for a wealthy collector down in London. So why, you may be asking, is it still in my possession nearly a year later? Well, you know what these playboys are like. He was hiding from coronavirus in the French Riviera, no doubt, and forgot he owned it. So anyway, I reminded him. He very kindly gave me this lovely Bentley Continental GT as a thank you. So thanks for that, nice little gesture. But anyway, I wasn't a fan of the interior, so I swapped it for an XT chain set, which obviously I predicted I would do in my last video. So back to this explosive, and more importantly, the idea of a historically correct restoration. Now, this is, I'm sure, the best example of a 1991 explosive I have seen on the internet. Of course, there will be some that are still boxed, but this one has been ridden. There are, however, to the connoisseur's eye, a few things that I think need to be done to make it absolutely perfect. And when money is no object, they are an absolute must. So today we're going to talk about those things. First of all, we need to talk about these crank caps. Now, as you can see on XT and DX chain sets of the period, you had these lovely chrome finished double hole screw-in crank caps, which are very hard to find and not cheap. You can see the original ones on the DX chain set on this Dynatech of mine. Now, when you look at the explosive, it didn't have them. I actually had to order some. Now, these were so expensive, I had to fly to my Swiss bank to authorise in person the transfer of funds. It took 24 hours. Finally, these arrived, and as I said when I was on Love Island, I got mugged off. As you can see, these are not original, they're not Shimano ones, they don't even have the chrome finish. They're made out of some kind of horrible cheap plastic. So we need to do something about this. Now, if you want to see the extent to which I mean mugged off, just look at the state of this. Now it's in the laboratory. Using the correct tool for insertion, when I screwed this thing in, you can see the tool just went through it like paper. So yes, I was not amused. However, I'm going to use my infinite resource and sagacity in the form of a craft knife, some Bondic and some liquid chrome to get these things absolutely up to the standard they should be. Now, if you've not heard of Bondic before, it's amazing. It's kind of like a cross between a super glue and a plastic welding kit. There's glue in this tube, which is like a liquid plastic, which you then set using this UV light. It really is sorcery, and it does work. Right, just got to let that dry. As you can see, the combination of Bondic and liquid chrome has made a beautiful mirror effect. It's going to need a bit of a rub with Autosol just to get those final imperfections out when it dries. One note on this liquid chrome here, the applicator was rubbish, it just didn't flow freely. So I used these cable cutters to just snip the top off it and tipped the whole lot on. Now, before we go any further, and before I put this back in the maximum security vault where it belongs, for followers of this Quinny, there is some reassurance that we are slowly inching towards perfection. You'll remember at the end of the last video on the subject, we talked about how I killed the 231 CD, which is this beautiful rim, on the back wheel, and replaced it with a 21st century replacement, the 317. Now, to any respecter of history, that is a violation. And of course, I finally went and sourced a more appropriate match. Now, 231 CDs are almost impossible to find, especially in, for some reason, the 36-hole variant. I don't know why when I built this bike in '93, I specified hubs and rims with 36 spokes. I obviously overestimated my power of destruction as a rider. You really don't need 36 spokes unless you weigh 36 stone. But anyway, that's what I've got. So finding a 36-spoke 231 CD was impossible. But then I found out about this internet site called The Facebook. Some of you may have heard of this. From what I'd heard, it was no place for a gentleman of delicate artistic sensibilities. I was very reluctant to go on there, but then when I finally did, I actually found that there are people on there who are very much of a similar mindset. In fact, I found an absolute gentleman on there called Dave who sold me this MA40, which is a perfectly appropriate match for the 231 for a very cheap price. So thank you, Dave. So to give everybody some reassurance, the MA40 is now on the bike where it belongs. It looks lovely next to the 231. It's a slightly narrower rim, but otherwise very similar. It's nice and straight. The only problem with MA40s, as all vintage bike fans will know, is they are an absolute pig to get tyres on and off. All right, here's the fun part of the video. Let's turn this into a game. Now, apart from the crank caps that we've talked about, what I want you to do is pause this video in a minute, and in the comments, leave as many faults, imperfections and anachronisms as you think you can spot. And whoever gets closest when you restart the video and see it play out, obviously there's no prize because it's far too easy to cheat, but honorary cartel membership is yours. All right, if you haven't paused your video already, this is your last chance, because here are the spoilers. So, the historic restoration of this explosive has already been the subject of much ferocious debate amongst my inner circle. I can't wait to see what suggestions come up from the wider community. Here are mine. Now, first of all, you can probably see in this light that it's got a light coating of pink dust on it. That's definitely one thing to sort out. You'll know if you watched me butchering this pace fork how that happened. So I suppose that's one point. The next thing, I suppose, which is quite glaring, is this seat post. If you're specifying a black edition, certainly in the 1991 catalogue, it should have come as standard with a black Calloy seat post, not this modern aluminium one. So that's got to go. The next thing is the pedals. I don't know why somebody's put LX pedals. They're period correct, but plastic bodies and non-removable cages are not good enough for a bike of this provenance. So those are going and going to be replaced with the correct ones from the catalogue, which are about to be revealed. Next thing is the tyres. As I mentioned in the first video when I revealed this bike last year, the Kona Scratch and Sniff are a later pairing to the propulsion and equilibrium tyres that should have come with this bike. Now, the latter, of course, are impossible to find now, and if you did find them, 30-year-old tyres are not likely to be in good nick. So I'm prepared to overlook that and accept the slightly later Kona tyres. But of course, they look like they've been put on by an ape because the labels aren't matched up with the logos on the rims, which everybody that builds bikes knows is a sin. So we'll sort that out. The next thing, and we're getting really nerdy here, is the cassette. This isn't your old stock XT, this is actually a modern replacement, but I consider cassettes to be consumables, so I'm prepared to allow that because it is the same technology as you would have had back in the day, and of course the original one was worn out and would have chewed up the chain. Now we move to the brakes. As I said when I revealed this bike, somebody had put DX cantilevers on an otherwise XT equipped bike. Now this is where we get really nerdy because actually the difference is fairly minimal, but the gentleman who owns this bike insisted on it being correct. You could spec either DX or XT on the Explosive in the day. This one's clearly an XT one, so why somebody's put DX brakes on it, we don't know. Let me show you the differences. Right, so here I'm very pleased to say is a complete and perfect set of XT cantilevers to go on and replace the DX ones. Now, to the untrained eye, these are almost identical, but you can see that the retaining bolt here on the XT is a nicely finished sort of black sphere versus this stainless kind of cylinder here. The sticker on the DX is kind of embossed, whereas it's debossed on the XT, and also you've got that all-important original XT brake block. These things are like hen's teeth, so we're very privileged to have these. So it's a tiny swap, but it needs to be done for absolute historical correctness. The other thing, which I haven't tested, but I wouldn't be surprised, is there's probably a difference of a few grams in weight. There generally was between XT and DX, as you can see when I took apart the rear derailleurs recently, which are also visually very similar, but actually a few grams different. And also, of course, all importantly, the price was very different back in the day. So, of course, XT was the one to have. Okay, so we've talked about crank caps, pedals, seat post, tyres, cassette, brakes. Ah yes, the next thing on the list is these grips. Now these again are non-original, the original Kona ones of course. I consider those things to be consumable, so when they wear out and get binned, I'm actually quite happy to accept these as a historically correct replacement. These actually, we all had these in the early 90s because I think you got a free pair with MB UK magazine, either with a subscription or on the front cover. So we all had these OD Yeti grips and they're absolutely lovely. They're period correct and they're exactly what you would have put on 91 Explosive at the time. So I'm prepared to allow that. Two more anomalies down here. Number one, the original XT quick release skewers have gone and been replaced by some sort of aftermarket equivalent. Only the eagle-eyed would notice, but if you look closely it says Joytech on there instead of Shimano. So that's going to need to be rectified, strictly speaking. And the next thing is this Project 2 fork, which I have talked about before. In the catalogue this was meant to be specified with the Track 2 fork, which actually was a modular fork with separate legs and a bolted crown like this slightly more high-end pace fork. Now they actually recalled the Track 2 forks in 1991 because I think the legs were walking out of the crowns, and for safety reasons therefore most of the later explosives made it to the shop floor with these Project 2 forks. So this is correct, although anomalous if you are sticking to the letter of the catalogue. And then a few final things. These stem bolts really should spend a night in the vinegar, which they will do. And then following the cleanup, I am convinced this is going to be the best used explosive of its age in the world. I'm not looking for box fresh, complete historical perfection, because I like bikes with stories. So obviously no respraying, no new decals, none of that. But at least it's going to be a historically faithful restoration, and I'm very excited to get to work. Crankcap news flash. Who knew that liquid chrome would dissolve on contact with metal polish? Not me, but anyway, I've managed to get this kind of brushed aluminium effect, which I think actually matches the crank quite nicely. What kind of monster puts blue cable end caps on an all black build? Not on my watch. Little before and after, strictly for the heads. Alright, time for an unboxing reaction video, which I know you kids are loving nowadays. First of all, this has arrived from Châtelet-en-Brie, which is just outside the Forêt de Fontainebleau, which I believe is one of the fine vintage seat post producing regions. So if I'm not much mistaken, this is not actually a French seat post, it's an original authentic Taiwanese. So this is the black Calloy one, discreet, basic, light, strong and cheap, but most importantly catalogue correct. So that's the first important delivery. The second thing is from another one of my new friends on the Facebook, the exact pedals that should be on that bike. These are Sakai low fats, the top of the range ones with the replaceable cages, and they look like they're in superb condition. Obviously a bit of soapy water will sort that one out. Take off these nasty power grips, and what we've got is a real treat. Slightly loose bearing on this one, but nothing I can't service, so that'll be this evening's fun. Absolutely lovely champagne coloured cage on these ones, which is so much nicer than the sort of charcoal grey on the slightly more basic low fats that I've got on my rolling parts bin. In fact, I really am quite envious. I wouldn't say this is my favourite bike maintenance job, cleaning the tiny bearings out of a pedal, but it did need doing. 13 bottom ones, 10 top ones. Putting this back together is not worth videoing, but the end product is going to be fabulous. These have come up perfect. Light toothbrush and a grease gun, and there we go. When Alexander saw the breadth of his domain, he wept, for there are no more worlds for him to conquer. And before you start spitting at me with rage for misquoting Plutarch, I know the XT skewer is still missing from the front hub, it is in the post. But apart from that, I think you will find this bike is faultless. Of course, it has a bit of patina for 30 years of authentic use. It has not been kept in bubble wrap. It would be far less interesting if that were the case. As it stands, I challenge anybody to find me a nicer 1991 Explosive. And I look forward to seeing in your comments how many of my flaws and faults you agreed with, and if you think there are any more. Thanks for watching as always, and see you next time.